A prime minister just resigned. Like, what is going on?
I just advise everybody to please stay tuned to the end, because I am going to take Doug Ford to the dry cleaner and I'm going to criticize him.
And you never criticize Ford. I don't think I've ever heard you criticize. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Radical Center podcast, where we talk about everything that you need to know about Canadian politics, provincial politics in Ontario. And I don't know if you want to know about anything else, you want us to talk about anything else from a radical centrist perspective, let us know. You would notice that today I am wearing red lipstick in solidarity with Liberal members across the country who are going to make a big decision in the next few months. And we are going to help you understand what's going on with that big decision and how it all works. And if you have any specific questions you want us to ask, you don't want us to ask, but you want us to answer, you can let us know. Cody, how are you doing today? Lots has happened. A prime minister just resigned. Like, what is going on?
Trudeau resigned on Monday. We had a lot to put in this show because there was a lot that happened this week. I just advise everybody to please stay tuned to the end, because I am going to take Doug Ford to the dry cleaner and I'm going to criticize him. So once we get through all the leadership stuff, it's going to be an exciting end to this podcast. So stay tuned.
And you never criticize Ford. I don't think I've ever heard you criticize Ford that much. So I'm actually interested to hear what's on.
And I haven't told you either, because that's not how we work.
You haven't told me.
Yeah.
I don't know. What is he so upset about? I gotta say, I have been mainly paying attention to the federal leadership race. You know, people know I used to be very, very involved with the Liberal Party, and leadership races are all the rage. It's so exciting. You know, this is the first leadership race I have no intention of getting involved in since I was a teenager. So it's a really big deal. And it's
unless Melanie Jolie was going to get in, then you were going to get involved.
Yes, and not to support her. So. For the opposite reason, but she's not going to get in, and we are going to get into that. We're going to get into who the candidates are, and you know, I love the stuff. Like this is my Super Bowl. Okay, if there was a Super Bowl that I would be, you know, glued to and obsessing over, this is it. So the next 3 months for me are going to be very, very exciting. And all my friends will, whether they like politics or not, will have to hear about it. And we'll talk about it here. So, but enough about me. Let's get right into it. A leadership race, again, very exciting thing, has been set for the Liberal Party. Justin Trudeau resigned he hasn't resigned yet. He is still the leader of the Liberal Party right now. And he is still the prime minister right now, but he announced that he would be resigning when the party, as prime minister and as leader, when the party chooses a new leader. And this is a very, very legal, normal process. I know lots of people will be thinking, how can someone become prime minister without an election? How can someone just, you know, basically come out of nowhere? How does the party get to decide? But that is actually how our system works. So, you know, it's nothing new. So there will be a new prime minister that will be selected by Liberal members specifically. Now, the rest of my prediction is that we will go into an election as soon as the House returns, and this new prime minister will be prime minister for about 5.5 minutes, and we'll talk more about the Liberal Party's chances later on. But Cody, what are your first thoughts about all of this? March 9th is the date. There's a lot of rules involved in leadership races. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, the funny thing about leadership races is, because in our country, parties are basically treated like private corporations where they can, you know, set their own rules, and they can pretty much decide. The leader or the party executive could decide with unlimited power almost whether you're the leader or whether you're a candidate. I will say that the way this race has been structured is to favor one candidate. And one candidate only, and his name is Mark Carney. And that's important. This leadership race is important for the rest of the country. Even if the person who becomes prime minister after Justin Trudeau is prime minister for all of 5 minutes, because at the end of the day, they're going to be the prime minister, right? So these rules that I've seen, the date, it's obviously shortened. You only have until January the 23rd to announce your intention. Shortly after that, to sign up members. The biggest hurdle, which is what we did in the Conservative Party too, conservatives can hold their criticism because it's very hypocritical. $350,000 as the entry fee. And that just whittles down the field because there's like as an individual person, it's very hard to raise $350,000 in the span of a few weeks.
It's impossible. It's really impossible, right? Like, I have two opinions on this, and I've been struggling with where I land on it, and I don't think I've, figured out where I actually am. So I'll tell you. So in terms of the entrance fee, does it appear that it is set to favor a particular candidate who will not have a problem raising $350,000 a very short period of time? Yes, it does appear to be that way. However, having served on the provincial executive of the party, there are a lot of things that you have to take into consideration when making rules like that. One, do you really want the average person to be running and walking into the prime minister's office? Right? That's the first question, right? Do you really want me just showing up, signing a whole bunch of members, and becoming prime minister? The answer to that is probably not, right? You want to have somebody from a party perspective. I'm not saying from the average person perspective. I'm sure the average Canadian would be like, well, they're so horrible. Maybe somebody who is from the outside and should just show up and take over. But that's not what the the party perspective. The party perspective would be is we have a prime minister's office that we have to have some sort of protection around, not just from, which is also in the best interest of Canadians, because you don't know who's going to organize a whole lot of members. There's a lot of people who are special interest groups. There's a lot of people who would get involved for all sorts of different reasons. So you have to have a certain I guess so you have to have certain rules that are going to produce a certain level of a certain caliber of candidates, right? For a party to be, successful, taken seriously, all of that. That's one. Basically, what I understand from this is they are looking for cabinet minister level candidates and above. Mark Carney is a big name in the Liberal Party. He's a big name in Canada, former Bank of Canada governor. But, usually the average senior bureaucrat is not also going to be someone who is going to put together $350,000 in a short period of time. And I'm sure he's got a lot of help from Liberals who have the capacity to organize and to fundraise and to make things like that happen, to make this happen. So in a way, yes, I understand that it does appear that it's, favors one candidate perhaps, but I would also say that it's more so targeted towards attracting a certain caliber of candidate and ensuring that whoever walks into the prime minister's office has some sort of profile and has some sort of experience level that would fit that, right? That's my perspective on it. And I also agree, the Conservative Party asked for $300,000 a couple of years ago, and they weren't even anywhere near government, right? So, and they're still not even in government. He's doing very well, but $300,000 to be in official opposition might be a little bit steeper than $350,000 to get a chance to run for actual prime minister, even if it's just for 5 minutes. So that's my perspective on it. I know lots of Liberals are not going to agree with me on this. They're going to be like, Nokha, you're all about grassroots stuff, and now you're saying it's okay to do this. But you gotta weigh pros and cons to stuff. What do you think of the candidates who are rumored to be running? Lots of candidates said they're not going to run, or lots of potential candidates said they're not going to run. We don't have to get into that. Sorry, folks, but if you said you're not running, we don't really need to go into details of that. But there are 3 big names that are rumored to be, the frontrunners. Christy Clark, former Premier of BC, former Liberal Premier of BC. Chrystia Freeland, the Finance Minister who brought down Justin Trudeau. And Mark Carney. What do you think of these options? Do you expect that any other big names might run who might make it to the top of the ballot?
The way I explained it to some people this weekend, because I had quite a few friends and family reach out to me and ask me uh, how these things work. And I told them, look, there's typically, the way I look at it, there's typically like 3 tiers of candidates. There's, tier 3 or whatever. There's tier 3 where it's people who nobody knows or has ever heard of before, has no snowball's chance in hell of winning. There's tier 2, which are people who may be well known in a party, who have some organizing capabilities to actually put their name in. And then there's tier 1, which is obviously the top few candidates. I'll start off with Christy Clark. I thought it was quite interesting this week. The CBC report, and they actually gave her a chance to clean it up, right? People are allowed to change their mind. They're allowed to switch parties. That's democracy. But that's not what she did here. Like, from my perspective, that's not what she did here. In my mind, it's the same thing as what Jean Charest did in the Conservative Party, which happens to be the reasons that she claims to have switched parties temporarily, right? Because when he got in the race, I was skeptical because first he was a Conservative, then he was Liberal Premier of Quebec, and then he's back to being a Conservative because he thought it was doing a duty to the country. It's one of the reasons why I still voted for Patrick Brown, even though he sent out a press release telling his supporters to support Jean Charest. So I can understand from my own personal experience why people discount Christy Clark.
She definitely made a mistake. And she said that she made a mistake. From my perspective is this isn't something she was supposed to not be prepared for. You do not send your candidate on national TV without preparing them for all the questions that they might be asked. And if you happen to be a former Liberal Premier who, for some reason, whatever reason, I don't care what the reason is, but for whatever reason, you decided to go around campaigning for a Conservative leadership candidate and publicly said that you are going to join the party so that you can vote for this person and support this person. Maybe he's her best friend. I don't care. Her team should have prepared her for it. This isn't a secret. This isn't something she didn't know happened. This isn't something they wouldn't know has happened. This is something she should have been prepared for. She should have had an answer to, very easily. And this is something I really don't understand. And we saw this a lot in the provincial leadership race with Bonnie, where she just wouldn't be prepared to answer questions that, she is going to be asked. Like, you're going to be asked these questions. So prepare your candidate to be able to answer these questions. These are very simple things. And, I think it was poorly handled for sure. I don't think this is going to be the end of her leadership race. I don't know how well liked she is within the Liberal Party. I met her once. She is very likable. She's very approachable, very, very nice. But there is a thing with the Liberal Party being a little bit of a Montreal and Toronto kind of crowd, right? So there's that corridor, the Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto corridor, and that's where most of the super heavily involved Liberals tend to be. BC is a little bit far, so I think they've got like their own thing going on there, and there isn't a lot of interactions, and people don't really know each other that much. So I don't know how well she is known among your average involved Liberal. I also don't know how well liked she is, given that there's been a lot of criticism around her governing in policy while she was Liberal Premier in BC. So, however, I do not think this is the end of her leadership race. I think she will continue. And like I said, I think she is a very, very likable person. I have met her once, Chrystia Freeland. I didn't find that same vibe in terms of likability. I've never met Mark Carney, so I can't speak to that. But yeah, so they her team just really needs to be more prepared Any team needs to be prepared for the questions that you know you're going to be asked, right? It's very simple. What are the
Right.
questions we know we're going to be asked? How are you going to respond? Very simple.
Well, it's also too like we've both been candidates. It's politics 101, right? Even when they do a scrum, politicians are prepared to do a scrum. And I had a habit of when I told with my campaign manager, I said, I want to know every possible question that the media could ask me, even if you think they're not going to ask it. The most obvious questions, right? So, yeah, I mean, is her leadership campaign over? I mean, we don't know because she hasn't come up with the money and she hasn't put her name on the ballot. So I'm not saying it's over. She could be wounded. The next person we have to talk about on that tier one list is Chrystia Freeland, which you alluded to. It was quite interesting this week. And one of the reasons why I say the leadership race is tailored towards one candidate, because right off the bat, when Justin Trudeau resigned, in his true Justin Trudeau fashion, he took the knife that his most loyal foot soldier, Chrystia Freeland, had put there, took it out, and gave it to her 10 times worse. Not by making disparaging comments. It's actually even worse. I think that the prime minister gave her chances of winning against Pierre Poilievre almost slim to none by complimenting her and saying that she had been an incredible political partner throughout just about everything they had done as a government and in the party over the decade. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree with that. I think she would be the worst candidate to replace Trudeau. Again, nothing against Chrystia. I don't think she's the most, charming politician out there, but there's a lot of politicians that are not charming, and that's fine. But you're absolutely right. She is way too connected directly to Justin Trudeau. She was the finance minister. She was the deputy prime minister, right? Or she is. And you can't get away from that. You just can't get away from that. He's unpopular. People don't like him, which means they're not going to like anybody who's that closely connected to him. She would be the worst possible choice for the Liberal Party at this time. I don't think she should run. If I were her, I'd be like, I'm not doing this. Whether she runs for a seat or doesn't run for a seat or finds herself a fancy job elsewhere as a former finance minister, that might be a better option. But it would be a terrible choice for the Liberal Party to go with Chrystia. And again, nothing against her. It's just she is way too connected to the most unpopular prime minister of our time. And she's not going to be able to distance herself from him in any sort of way, from any policy that he put forward. So, and there's one more candidate, and that is Mark Carney. He's an interesting one because, on one hand, he is very easily defined as, they've got these ads running now, just like Justin and carbon tax Carney and da 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 da. And I understand that. But also, he's actually never had anything to do with it because he's never been in government, right? The man doesn't even have a seat. He's never been he's never been a politician. I don't even know how long he's had a Liberal membership. So in a way, he's completely distant from everything that's happened. But in a way, he's also quite connected to it because of the relationship that we everybody knows he has with Trudeau and the team around him. But he's never been at the table. Mark Carney has never sat there and voted or made any single decision on what's going on in government right now. And I think that's going to be his biggest argument, right? Sure, I have a friend, but it doesn't mean I agree with everything that friend does or doesn't do. And I have never been in that room. And this is what I would say if I were him. I've never been in that room. I never had a vote. And, I'm going to tell you today what are the things that I would do differently and how I would structure things differently. So those are the three candidates, and it's going to be really exciting. What do you think of Carney?
So I agree with pretty much everything you said, right? And I have said before that if you want to do something differently, sometimes the best thing to do is to get somebody from the outside, right? It doesn't necessarily matter to me whether he has a seat in the House of Commons or not. Same thing with Bonnie Crombie. I don't criticize her because she doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons. I criticize them because I have policy differences with them. So Mark Carney seems to be the party favorite, right? They seem to want to choose him. What's the reason? I'm not entirely sure. But what I do know is Tom Mulcair got criticized for saying that Mark Carney may be better than everybody is saying. And he got ridiculed for it. He got ridiculed by Twitter accounts like Polling Canada, who got everything wrong about the American election. And I actually listened to Tom Mulcair. This guy might be onto something. So if the Liberal Party wants to save the furniture, Mark Carney might be the guy. If you give it to Chrystia Freeland, then you'd be lucky to save the clothes that you're wearing. You know what I mean? So, but we'll see what happens. It's going to be an interesting race. It's going to be short. Mm-hmm. Let me put it this way. You and I both know that there are, when it comes to internal party rifts or when it comes to leadership races, people who are in positions of power in that party try to exert their influence on the process, whether that be subtle or insubtle. But I can tell you one thing that I know for sure, without even knowing, is that Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister's office, they want Mark Carney, but they want to make it look like a very democratic process.
Yeah, and that's a very common experience in all political parties. Just to add something to that, I agree with everything you said. Just to add something to that, leadership races tend to be, it's like a big family fight, right? Everybody's fighting. Everybody wants their candidate to win, and they can get pretty exciting and pretty nasty sometimes. And I think we saw a tweet from Catherine McKenna, calling out Christy Clark. I will say one thing in terms of who I think will have the best chance against Pierre. I don't think it's Carney. I disagree with you on that. I actually think it's Christy Clark. I think that Carney will do better internally in the Liberal Party, right? But so maybe he'll win. I don't know. But I'm not ready to call that yet. But I think Christy Clark will be a very tough candidate for Pierre to beat. I'm not saying she will win, but I think she's the only person who is going to give him a run for his money. And the reason why, and you can see that they're freaking out on her about her running. Right? They're the ones who are like releasing. This. Yeah. They're the ones who are releasing. She's a conservative, right? What are you going to tell the average voter who wants to vote conservative that she's a conservative? Right? You're going to go telling the average voter who, you're polling and supposed to get 200 seats because of how well they're doing, because the average voter wants someone who has conservative leanings. You're going to tell them that the new Liberal leader is actually a conservative. They're going to be like, okay, let's look into that a little bit more, right? I think Christy will be, I have to not confuse Christy and Christia. This is going to be rough. But Christy is going to be the person who, if she wins the leadership, she will give Pierre Poilievre a run for his money. She will be the hardest one for him to define. Things don't stick to her as much as they do to other candidates. And I think, over the years, she's disagreed with the Liberal Party. She's disagreed with Justin Trudeau. She's tried to support a conservative leadership race. And that stuff isn't as hated by the average person. That stuff just doesn't work internally within a political party. But once you expand the audience to the general public, they're going to be like, yeah, we like this woman. She stops, she if she doesn't like something, she's going to speak her mind. So we'll see how it goes. But that's my only thing. Let's move.
I'm going to I got an analogy, okay?
Yeah.
I'll make it worth your while, okay? So the Liberal Party is like a couple going through a divorce.
Yeah, basically.
Is essentially what it is. And the Canadian public, they're like the children who is waiting to see who the new boyfriend or girlfriend is. Basically. So that's what we're in for.
Yeah, basically. And it's going to be one nasty divorce. So we will continue to bring you analysis on that front. Let's move to provincial politics. I know we're gonna go over time today, but so much has happened. Come on, like
Yeah.
you got to give us the opportunity to tell you everything that's going on. Provincial politics, Mr. Ford, he is the only one who's out there trying to do something about these tariffs. He is trying to save Ontario. He is trying to, he looks like he's the prime minister these days. I don't know. But Cody, what do you think? You said you have a lot to say about Mr. Ford this week.
Yeah, so before people start questioning my patriotism, I want to be there very clear, okay? Number one, I'm wearing my Made in Canada Roots hoodie. And
You
number
were
two,
wearing red to support the liberalism. the
I'm here for moral support for the Liberal Party,
okay.
okay? But as I said, like before people start questioning my patriotism, I do want to make it very clear. When I wear a suit, every single time you'll see that I wear a Canadian flag on my lapel. The only time I wasn't allowed to wear it was my wedding, and that was because my wife was adamant. When I ran in 2022, the very first initiative that I took on was I printed 500 Canada Day signs that literally said, proud to be a Canadian. But what I'm about to say is really going to shock you. I think that Doug Ford has effectively filled the void by the Prime Minister regarding the Canada-US relationship. Somebody's got to urge the federal government to, secure the border more and fund the military. But this week, I really got irritated because this week he goes on Fox News and he gets humiliated by Jesse Waters because of the first state bullshit that everybody's getting on with. And to us, it was great. Played with our domestic audience, obviously, because we thought Jesse Waters was a moron. But what we don't see is the flip side of that, and that is that he became the subject of ridicule on many of the American podcasts that I listen to, which holds significant influence over the incoming Trump administration and the American public. And look, while I think that the bipartisanship that he's trying to do is, it's understandable, or trying to get Republicans and Democrats, I actually think that approach is very misguided. He went on CNN and, you know, their network is hurting, much like all of the corporate media entities in the United States. He was trying to communicate with their viewers in order to leverage federal, state, and local Democrats to pressure Trump. But the problem is they have no power. They lost the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and it understands why bipartisanship is not necessarily going to sway Trump's decision making. And look, you can hate Donald Trump all you want, but this is not emotional. You could still be emotional and what is the word I'm looking for? Passionate. That's the word. And Donald Trump, look, he's not negotiating his next 5 or 10 moves. He's already on move 50, right? We're playing chess. He's playing checkers. He's thinking 30 or 40 years from now. I mean, you think about how much noise he's made since he's been elected. That's all we've been talking about. But I was baffled when Doug Ford said that Canada and the provinces are just now starting to work on a list of tariffs to retaliate because Trump had this policy ready to go in November of 2022. And in the summer, he was already drafting these policies. He was writing the executive orders. And our media is leading us to believe back then that he couldn't win when he's planning his agenda. Now, the last thing that I'm going to say, which just drove me bonkers this week, I could not be more angrier when he said this, okay? He went on to say that he might have to pump tens of billions of dollars into the economy to counteract the tariffs. And to take out all the explicitives, you know what I said to myself? I said, Doug, are you out of your frickin' mind? Like, we've already got a 5-alarm fire on inflation from the pandemic spending, and he basically wants to grab a gasoline truck and blow it up in the middle of downtown Toronto. And that, to me, to a conservative, if that's going to be the ballot box question, I have a real problem with that, because even with everything that happened during the pandemic, with people losing their jobs and people needing the financial support, we still don't have any accountability for that spending.
Yeah.
So so that's what I have to say. I'll let you chime in because I
So
don't want to take up all the airtime, but you could chime in.
no, I think that was very well said. I agree in terms of the interview not necessarily going so well, and maybe perhaps speaking to the wrong audience. But I think in terms of what he's saying, and we'll get into this a little bit more in terms of what he's saying, needing to pump money into the economy. I think that's election talk. I think that's election positioning, because you got to think of it this way. These tariffs are not going to be on everything. They're going to be on specific products, basically. So, if you needed to create some sort of protection around it and you needed to pump some money into the economy to protect it, you just need to support those sectors, right? Like, you don't need to pump money into, like, we're not talking about, I saw an interview where he kind of said it was similar to what we had to do during COVID. It's not going to be like that, right? What we had to do during COVID is you basically had to give everybody money to survive, right? You had the federal government basically giving everybody a paycheck in order to for people don't starve and end up homeless, basically. And the provincial government had to support every sector and every kind of business. That's not going to be the case, right? Like, they're not putting tariffs on people. Know I run my own business. I'm not going to be impacted by the tariffs, right? Are they going to have to support specific sectors and specific manufacturing to decrease the impact of the tariffs on the average Canadian and the average consumer? Yeah, they're going to have to do that. And I think that'll be a plan developed by the provincial and federal governments. And basically, it'll be, we got to get through the Trump years. And then, there'll be a new president, and they'll have a better negotiation plan with him to figure out how this is going to go. And then, maybe figure out long-term solutions and give them some time to figure out long-term solutions. But the rhetoric that you're upset about, I heard, to me that's election talk. To me, that's him saying, look, we have a big crisis on our hands. It's going to be really scary and really terrible, and I need a mandate in order to protect you, Ontarians, from Big Trump and his scary tariffs. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if you give me 4 more years so I can have the stability and I can have the mandate in order to do that. To me, that sounds like we're going to have an election pretty soon. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this week, but probably around springtime. If the federal leadership race ends March 9th, House is probably going to be prorogued. What was the date for the prorogation of the House? I think it's end of March, right?
Yeah, March, either the 24th or the 29th, I believe.
Yeah, so the House is prorogued until the end of March, which means the soonest a federal election can be, even there has to be a confidence vote. There's a process for that. So we're not looking at a federal election until like at least, May, if not later. Does Doug Ford want to have a provincial election, get it over with before there's a federal election? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I think what you're hearing that's getting on your nerves is his positioning as to how he wants to go about, explaining to the average Ontarian why he would be having an early election when he has a majority government and he could do whatever he wants, and it's he still has a couple of years. Usually you call an early election when you have a minority government and you'd say we need stability, and we can't have a threat of an election every 6.5 weeks, right? That's when
Yeah.
you call an early election to be like, we need to get work done, and these guys are just causing too much noise, and we need to quiet them down. But with a majority government, you can't do that, right? You can't say we need to govern properly, and these guys are making too much noise and not letting us do our jobs, and that's why we need to have an election. You're already governing, like, on your own. You don't need nobody's getting in the way of your governing. The way to do that is to find a crisis and say, I need to help you get through a crisis. And the only way I can help you to get through a crisis, right? I'm not saying he's manufacturing this crisis. This is a real thing. But the only way I'm going to be able to help you get through this crisis is if I have a full mandate for another 4 years so I can focus on delivering what needs to be delivered for you. So that's what I think he's doing.
Yeah.
Will it work or will it not? We will see. I'm not ready to talk about that yet, but I expect there's going to be an election sometime in the spring. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be very fairly soon.
Mm-hmm.
Look, the last thing, I'm a little bit more calmer now because I think I've been holding that in this entire week. So,
You had to get it
as I
out.
said, my draft is full. So exhale.
Yeah.
The last thing I would do to put a bow on this, because all of this is, Trudeau's resignation, Doug Ford doing what he's doing. This is all because of the tariff issue, and there are times on the show where I ask questions. There are times where I make predictions. But this is a time where I'm telling people this is the way it is. And I'm telling people at home that literally all of our political leadership is getting this whole tariff thing wrong. And they're wasting their time, even if it's one sentence, on this 51st state troll thing that's only meant to inflame us as Canadians and to ridicule our prime minister. And a lot of people in the media get emotional about it and they say Trump is crazy, Trump will hurt American jobs, and he's unpredictable. But it really isn't rocket science, guys. And to all the media people, to all the people in leadership, including Doug Ford, if you would just go to Indigo, buy The Art of the Deal, it lays out everything in black and white of what Donald Trump is trying to do. And actually, you don't even need to go to Indigo. You could go to ChatGPT and you could type in summarize the art of the deal and it'll tell you what's going on. But you're right. Back to Doug Ford. This is electioneering talk because, a businessman's job is to make money. A politician's job is to get votes. If you get into politics to not get votes, then you're in the wrong business and you're probably a terrible businessman. So listen, my point was at the end of the day, if his ballot question is, do you support me pumping tens of millions of dollars into the economy? I'm going to have a hard time doing that. And even as a conservative, I'm going to be very critical in asking him what that means. Right. So that's what I'll have to say.
Yeah. And knowing Doug and his team and how they do things, he will come up with a very, very, very clear plan of this is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to spend the money on. These are the sectors we're going to support in order to help you get through this so we can get through the Trump years. They're going to have to start using Trump years.
My job could be affected too because I work in construction, right? It's not just affecting people who are going to buy, it's also affecting people like me whose jobs rely on people buying new condos.
Right. And that's exactly right. Like there's so much that this would impact. So it is going to be necessary for governments to support the sectors that are going to be impacted, because not supporting them would impact us all. But the support that's going to be required is going to be targeted support. It's not going to be blanket support like we saw with the COVID years where everybody needed help. Like basically, I worked in healthcare at the time. I was a social worker in acute care and intensive care. I think I was the only person I knew that wasn't affected, right? Because my job was, I still went to work when everything shut down. It was us and first responders. So it's a very different reality, I think. And we'll have to wait and see. But I see an election coming our way, a provincial election coming our way. I see a federal election coming our way right after the leadership race. And I will end today's podcast on one note, which I thought was really exciting this morning. Jean Chrétien, my favorite prime minister. And I know he's kind of like the definition of the Liberal Party. I would say that, if you were to think of someone who embodies the Liberal Party, it would be Jean Chrétien. And he said that the Liberal Party needs to go back to the radical center. And I wholeheartedly agree with him. And that just made my day. You know, I've had a rough week. People know I've tweeted about that, but and that's why we're a little bit late getting this out. But Jean Chrétien, you made my day, or made my week a whole lot better. So thank you for that.
Yeah, he said a lot of things that I agreed with too this week, but I have to say by far that is correct. You have to pivot to the back to the radical center.
And when they do, we will be right here waiting for them.
Yeah. Jean Chrétien, if you're out there and you want to come on the podcast, we'd be more than happy to have you.
Absolutely. We would love to have you on the Radical Center to talk about radical centrism. And, you know, we'd love to also hear specific things or what he thinks that the Liberal Party needs to do in order to actually return to the radical center. I have my own ideas about that, but it would be great to hear from him about specific policy issues. I don't know if he would do that, though, just because of who he is. I don't think he'd specifically say things like, get rid of the carbon tax. But we'll see. Thank you very much for joining us again today. We hope that we gave you a good breakdown of what's going on and what's gone on in 1 week in Canadian politics. We'll see how things shape up next week, and we will be back on the Radical Center with more for you. As always, please like and subscribe and share with your friends, but also, because there's a lot going on and we know that there's probably a lot of questions, but if you have any questions that you'd like to have us answer, we'd be happy to do that. Just send us a message, or leave a comment on any of our platforms, which we do regularly read, and then we'll go from there. But thank you very much again, and we look forward to another episode of the Radical Center next week.
Take care, everyone.